Are you ready for a heart-pounding showdown where a quiet Alabama motel becomes the battleground between ruthless bikers and a seemingly ordinary cleaner who turns out to be Delta Force? In this story, you'll witness roaring engines, tense confrontations, and the nail-biting moment when our unassuming heroine finally reveals her elite combat skills. From cunning sabotage to a final standoff in a creaking old barn, the action will keep you on the edge of your seat to discover how she single-handedly outsmarts a dangerous gang and what happens when the authorities join the fray. Be sure to listen through to the very end. If you enjoy thrilling stories like this one, please subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing more epic tales filled with suspense, surprises, and powerful lessons. So sit back, tune in, and get ready for the unforgettable adventure that awaits. Martha Green was the kind of person whose unassuming nature made her almost invisible. She lived in a sleepy town in southern Alabama, on the outskirts of a place most people couldn't pinpoint on a map. The region had a certain stillness to it. Fields stretched out far and wide, old shacks and farmhouses dotted the landscape, and the nearest convenience store closed at 9 sharp. It was in this remote and quiet pocket of America that Martha found employment as a motel cleaner. The motel stood near a highway exit that many long-haul truckers and occasional wanderers used as a pit stop. To most who stayed there, it was simply a cheap place to rest. Few, if any, noticed Martha as she went about her duties, diligently cleaning rooms or restocking supplies. Despite her ordinary facade, Martha had a certain discipline about her. She rose early, at precisely 5 o'clock a.m., and did a brisk walk around the motel parking lot for exercise. Occasionally, guests would see her performing neat, deliberate stretches, perhaps reminiscent of a military regiment. But in a place like this, such details blended into the dusty surroundings. The staff there, consisting of a fatigued manager, a chatty receptionist, and a couple of part-time housekeepers, knew Martha was a reliable worker, but they had no clue about her past. Martha preferred it that way. She hadn't always been just Martha the motel cleaner, but nobody needed to know that. If one had the skill to read between the lines, there were subtle hints of something extraordinary. The way she deftly carried multiple heavy linens without strain, the silent confidence in her step, the direct yet calm gaze when confronting anything unexpected. She exuded a quiet authority that occasionally made rowdy guests stop in their tracks. Still, no one ever asked questions. Life here was simple, and people appreciated routine over curiosity. That quiet existence was about to be shattered. Recent news stories whispered of a biker gang expanding their territory through small-town Alabama. Word was they traveled in packs, stirring up trouble, intimidating locals, and eyeing properties they deemed useful for their shady activities. These rumors had circulated for a few weeks, mentions of stolen vehicles, unexplainable fires at local businesses, and break-ins at remote gas stations. Small happenings maybe, but enough to set some locals on edge. Martha, too, had heard talk through the motel grapevine. Truckers who passed through often shared cautionary tales of roving gangs. More than once, she caught a furtive exchange between guests about big trouble heading south. But if you asked anyone in town about it, they'd shrug. After all, trouble had never really come knocking in a place that seemed so out of the way. Folks locked their doors at night and trusted in the quiet. They assumed that if any real criminals passed through, they'd keep right on going. Martha, however, knew better. Even as she changed sheets and vacuumed floors, she would glance out the window, scanning the lot with an alertness that went beyond mere habit. In her heart, she sensed the calm would soon break, like the hush before a storm. And that storm, unbeknownst to them, would descend upon the motel. Neither the bikers nor the manager, nor the handful of staff and transient guests had any inkling that the unassuming cleaner once went by another name in another life. Sergeant First Class Martha Grizzly Green of Delta Force. At 6:30 in the morning, a raspy radio broadcast echoed in the motel lobby. Carl, the night shift manager, listened absent-mindedly while he tidied up the coffee station. The local newscaster spoke about a string of burglaries, each one edging closer to the small town. The reporter's voice, though tinny through the old radio, carried an undercurrent of worry. She referenced the mysterious group suspected of orchestrating the break-ins, rumored to be a biker gang with the word blackout emblazoned on their leather jackets. They were bold, the newscaster said, targeting places right off the highway, often leaving a swath of vandalism behind. Martha entered the lobby to refresh the complimentary coffee supplies. Her ears perked up at the mention of the Blackout Gang. She'd heard the name tossed around by a trucker just a few days ago. Glancing over at Carl, she spotted a frown creasing his forehead. He had children and a wife living not too far from the motel, and no doubt the rumor of a roving gang weighed on him heavily. Martha considered asking him what exactly he had heard, but her instinct for privacy, embedded after years of covert missions, kicked in. She kept her questions tucked away. Instead, she offered a gentle nod as if to say, "It'll be all right." That day felt slightly off-kilter. There were fewer guests than usual, which meant fewer rooms to clean. Yet the sense of an impending threat loomed in Martha's mind. As she dusted the corners of a rarely used suite, she recalled her Delta Force training. Memory flashed to endless drills, infiltration simulations, and the time she was deployed overseas in harrowing circumstances. She'd learned to read the environment like a map of potential hazards. Something in the air signaled trouble. Call it intuition or the heightened awareness that had once kept her alive in special operations. She told herself not to overreact. After all, rumors were just that, rumors. Still, her routine shifted. She started conducting small checks around the motel property. She walked the perimeter each morning and afternoon, discreetly looking for signs of forced entries or suspicious tire tracks. By late evening, she'd do one final pass around the building, scanning the road beyond the parking lot with a vigilant eye. No one noticed. She still carried her mop or broom, blending in with her role as a humble cleaner. If anyone did see her wandering the grounds, they'd likely assume she was simply being thorough. In truth, she was quietly preparing. Late that afternoon, as the sky grew streaked with purple and orange, a pair of motorcycles sped past the motel. Their engines roared, shattering the silence of the rural road. Martha paused mid-sweep, her hand gripping the broom handle more tightly. The bikes slowed, almost as if the riders were sizing up the building. A fleeting moment, then they revved off again. Dust kicked up in their wake, forming a haze that lingered over the hot asphalt. Carl stepped outside, scratching his head. "They sure were in no hurry," he remarked. Martha simply nodded, tucking away another note. Possible recon. They might come back. Deep inside, a part of Martha longed for her old gear, her sidearm, her radio, the team at her back. But that was a lifetime ago. She'd chosen a quieter life for a reason. So she exhaled, forced her grip to relax, and told herself that maybe the bikes were just passing through. Yet her gut told her otherwise. Whatever had come to southern Alabama was not merely passing by. It was searching, surveying, preparing for something. And if they returned, well, they'd find more than they bargained for in Martha Green. As sundown approached, the arrival of new guests roused the quiet motel from its lethargic hush. A middle-aged couple in a worn-out station wagon pulled into the lot, exhaustion etched into their faces. They had been traveling for hours, seeking refuge for the night. Martha prepared room 7 for them, adding fresh towels and leaving a plastic-wrapped cup on the sink. They seemed grateful. Just another pair of travelers crossing the Alabama stretch on their way to who knows where. Later, a long-haul trucker checked into room 12. He looked relieved to find a vacancy. His hands still carried the grime of the road, and he rubbed his eyes wearily, as if the day had taken more from him than just hours behind the wheel. Martha exchanged a polite greeting, offering the man a handful of extra coffee pods for the small in-room machine. He accepted with a tired smile. No questions asked. That's how things worked here. People came and went without delving too much into each other's business. Yet Martha couldn't help but notice small details. The new arrival had the name Ronnie embroidered on his jumpsuit, a battered baseball cap perched on his head. He gripped a crumpled newspaper under his arm. The front page had a headline about local burglaries. The Blackout Gang was mentioned again in bold print. Before he walked off, Ronnie gave a knowing shake of his head toward the article. "This world's getting meaner every day," he muttered. Martha offered a non-committal shrug, though inside she recognized that the reports were coming closer to home. Walking back through the modest hallway to the housekeeping closet, she noticed one of the lights flickering. The place was old and in need of renovation, but the proprietor hadn't invested much since the motel's revenue was slim. The fragrance of cleaning solutions hovered. mixing oddly with the faint aroma of cigarettes from an earlier era. Martha opened the supply closet and pulled out some fresh pillowcases. A wave of memory washed over her. Countless times she had opened supply crates on missions, scanning their contents, inventorying gear. Now the items in her hands were pillowcases and detergent, not rifles and medical kits. It was a quiet transformation that sometimes unsettled her. Yet it had been her decision to leave that life behind after her final mission overseas. She wanted peace, a place where routine chores replaced bullets, and the only battles were with dusty rooms. She had found that place, at least until rumors of the biker gang hinted that chaos might be creeping in. After her shift, she stepped out to the parking lot for her customary inspection. She told herself it was just to get some fresh air, but really she was scanning the horizon. The wind rustled the nearby scrub, carrying the distant hum of a passing 18-wheeler. She noticed footprints near the side of the building. Fresh ones, too large for typical motel guests who usually wore casual shoes. These prints looked like heavy boots. She crouched, examined the marks for a moment, and felt a spike of adrenaline. It was just a small sign, but it confirmed her growing suspicion. Someone had been snooping around. Rising slowly, she turned to see a fleeting shadow slip behind the dumpster. By the time she reached the spot, whoever it was had vanished into the twilight. The next morning, she made sure to arrive even earlier than usual, scanning the parking lot again for anything out of place. Whatever trouble was brewing, she intended to be ready. She was no longer just Martha the motel cleaner. She was Martha Green, the former Delta operator who never left a threat unchecked. Even if the rest of the motel remained blissfully ignorant, she would do everything in her power to keep them safe. Inside her, an old fire rekindled, and she braced herself for whatever lay ahead. The sun had barely risen when Martha stepped out back to empty a trash bin. The early light cast long shadows across the dusty ground. She glanced to the side of the motel where a small alley led to a patch of overgrown weeds. It was a spot guests rarely ventured. This time she noticed two distinct sets of footprints near the dumpster, both from boots with thick treads. They were new, not from the night before. A chill ran through her, though the morning air was already warming up. Typically, the motel area would be deserted at this hour except for Martha and maybe one or two truckers heading off to catch the open road before traffic picked up. Martha knew the manager, Carl, wouldn't arrive until 8 a.m., and the receptionist was the only other person inside. Whoever had been outside must have come with purpose, not just random vagrants passing through. Using her phone's camera as quietly as she could, she snapped a few pictures of the footprints. It was something she'd picked up from her old life, documenting any anomaly, just in case. Though she was off the official grid now, old habits died hard. She scanned the footprints' depth, angle, and stride. They seemed to lead away from the dumpster toward a dirt path that connected to the main highway. It wasn't conclusive, but it was enough to confirm her hunch. Someone was actively scouting this place. Pulling her mind back to the mundane task at hand, she hoisted the trash bags into the dumpster. Yet she remained alert. The day passed with a strange tension. Trucks rumbled in and out, a few travelers checked in and out, but every time the roar of a motorcycle engine passed on the highway, Martha's nerves prickled. She remembered the pair of motorcycles from the previous evening, how they'd hesitated as they drove by. That slight pause was all the clue she needed. The next time they came around, they might not be so subtle. At around midday, she heard a commotion from the lobby. Two men in their 20s wearing denim jackets and riding boots were complaining to the receptionist about the price of a room. Their voices were raised, aggressive. Martha walked in to find the receptionist, Kayla, looking flustered. "This place ain't worth that kind of money," one man barked, slamming a fist on the counter. Martha observed them carefully. No obvious biker insignia, but they had that restless vibe of men accustomed to intimidation. She noted their stances, wide feet, shoulders tensed. Had they come from the same group that left footprints outside? Martha approached, her voice steady but polite. "Is there a problem here?" Her question hung in the stale motel air. The men turned to see a slim woman in a housekeeping uniform, not imposing at all, except for the look in her eyes. Something about her gaze was unsettling. Perhaps it was the quiet confidence. Perhaps something else. The men sneered. One spat on the floor, muttering, "Nothing we can't handle, lady." Martha's lips tightened, but she said nothing. Kayla quickly produced the registry forms, offering them the nightly rate. After a few more grumbles, the men paid in cash, snatched the key, and stomped off toward room 9. For the rest of the afternoon, they stayed in their room with the curtains drawn. Martha made a point to pass by the door a few times under the pretext of cleaning. She caught snippets of muffled conversation, the jangle of something metallic. Chains, maybe? An unsteady guitar riff from a portable speaker. She kept her ears open but gleaned little. By evening, the men emerged to head across the street to a nearby diner, leaving behind an air of tension. Martha lingered by their door, noting the faint smell of stale tobacco. Whatever their real reasons for being here, she doubted they were simply tourists. She reported her concerns to Carl, who shrugged in that resigned way of his. It wasn't the first time rough characters had blown through. Still, Carl's brow furrowed a code. "Just keep an eye out," he told her. Keeping an eye out was second nature for Martha. She was sure this was only the beginning, and when the time came, she would be prepared to do more than simply observe. She'd dealt with bigger threats than a couple of hot-headed drifters. The question now was whether these two were an advanced scout for something bigger, or merely small-time trouble. In her line of work, she'd learned to assume the worst and hope for the best. And so she waited. That night, as a sultry Alabama breeze drifted through the motel courtyard, Martha stared up at the hazy stars. The sky here always seemed broader than anywhere she'd been before, a vast canvas of inky black punctuated by faint glimmers of light. She let her thoughts wander, recalling how different life had been when she served in Delta Force. Back then, nights were spent in forward operating bases or covert camps, the tension so thick you could taste it in the air. She often couldn't allow herself the luxury of looking at the stars. Her eyes had to remain on the horizon, scanning for threats. Here, the tension was subtle but mounting. Despite the motel's veneer of normalcy, her instincts told her that trouble was on its way. She thought back to her final mission. It had been nearly 3 years since that day in a dusty overseas town where she led a small unit to rescue hostages. The stakes were high, and she had lost friends along the way. In the aftermath, she found herself consumed by guilt, haunted by nightmares. Leaving the service was her way of seeking atonement, or at least some semblance of peace. Alabama, with its slow tempo and wide-open spaces, offered exactly that, until now. Determined to be ready, Martha slipped into her tiny motel room, located in a separate wing meant for staff. There, hidden beneath a loose floorboard, she kept a locked metal case. She carefully pried up the board, revealing the box that contained a relic from her past, a Beretta M9 pistol. It wasn't the standard sidearm for Delta Force, but it was something she trusted, a carryover from earlier deployments. She checked to ensure it was oiled and in working order. The magazine was loaded but separate, which was how she stored it for safety. She also had a few small items from her old kit. Nothing major, just enough to handle emergencies. As she inspected the pistol, memories surged, a mixture of camaraderie, terror, and the adrenaline-fueled calm that had always come over her in combat. She slipped the weapon back into its case and replaced the floorboard. She hoped she wouldn't have to use it, but something told her the days of living quietly might be ending. Outside, she could hear the low rumble of the two men returning from the diner. Their conversation was slurred, charged with liquor and aggression. She made sure to stay out of sight, observing them from behind a curtain. They staggered back to room 9, nearly knocking over a potted plant by the entrance. One cursed loudly, complaining about this backwater dump, while the other laughed mockingly. Moments later, their door slammed. Martha exhaled, running a hand through her hair. She wasn't naive enough to think these two alone constituted the entire problem. They were likely scouts or small fries in a larger operation. She recalled how infiltration teams often worked: send a couple of foot soldiers to scope the area, find vulnerabilities, then report back. If that was the case, the next wave might arrive soon. She decided she would casually inquire around town in the morning. Perhaps the local diner staff or the gas station attendant had seen something. If the blackout gang was indeed expanding here, there would be a trail of frightened witnesses, half-hearted police reports, or rumors circulating at the local bar. She needed details. Her life, and potentially the lives of everyone in the motel, depended on being one step ahead. As she settled down for the night, Martha couldn't help feeling the old restlessness creeping back, the warrior's edge she thought she'd put away. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by half-remembered dreams of her past. All the while, she remained poised on an invisible trigger, ready for whatever came next. Dawn broke with a brilliant, peach-colored sky, the kind that made even the old motel look almost picturesque. Martha rose from bed feeling only half-rested, but she didn't waste time. She tied her hair into a tight ponytail, donned her usual housekeeping uniform, and stepped into the still cool air of the early morning. The parking lot was mostly empty, just a few cars from guests who hadn't yet checked out. The two men in room 9 had apparently hung a "Do Not Disturb" sign on their door. Martha wondered if they were sleeping off a hangover or if they had headed out already. Instead of starting her usual cleaning rounds, she walked to the diner across the street. It was a modest establishment with a neon sign that flickered erratically, but it served decent coffee and had a steady trickle of locals each morning. The smell of bacon and fresh biscuits hit her the moment she stepped inside. She took a seat at the counter, greeting the waitress, Lucy, with a nod. Lucy recognized Martha and offered a warm, if somewhat weary, smile. "They're saying it's going to be another scorcher today," Lucy remarked while pouring coffee. "How you holding up over there at the motel?" Martha sipped the coffee, relishing its heat. "We manage," she replied in her usual succinct manner. She hesitated, then asked in a casual tone, "You hear anything about folks causing trouble around here? Maybe a biker gang or something like that?" Lucy set down the coffee pot and frowned. "You mean those rumors? A few truckers mentioned seeing a gang pass through now and again. They stop for K, sometimes cause a stir at that 24-hour station. But I ain't seen 'em personally, except—" She trailed off, eyes shifting. "A couple of real rough-looking fellas were in here last night, had more beer than food, and left without tipping. Might be nothing, though." Martha nodded. She knew Lucy's "might be nothing" likely meant it's something, but let's not talk about it too loud. This town thrived on a sort of unspoken code. Keep your head down, and maybe trouble passes you by. Yet Martha, shaped by her past, believed in dealing with trouble before it mushroomed. "Thanks," she offered. "Just watch yourself, all right?" Lucy looked at her more closely then, as if sensing an undercurrent she couldn't name. "You too," she answered softly, leaving Martha to her coffee and thoughts. After finishing her meal, Martha swung by the gas station Lucy had mentioned. The morning shift attendant was a tired young man named Eddie, who wore a baseball cap and a perpetual expression of mild anxiety. She bought a bottle of water, then struck up a conversation about local gossip. Eddie was more willing to talk, perhaps because few people took the time to ask. "They've been coming in every couple days, blackout patches on their jackets," Eddie whispered, eyes darting around even though the station was empty. "They buy energy drinks or cigarettes. Sometimes they pay. Sometimes they just stare me down until I pretend not to notice." He exhaled shakily. "Then they roar off like they own the place." Martha's gut tightened. This was more than just rumor. "You see him yesterday?" she asked, feigning casual interest. Eddie nodded. "Late afternoon, 2 bikes. They were talking about checking out some motel. I heard them say something like, 'Ain't much security. We could set up real easy.'" Eddie swallowed hard. "Scares me, ma'am. They look dangerous." She left the station with her suspicions cemented. The men in room 9 were likely part of this group, or at the very least affiliated. She thought about confronting them outright, but that could blow whatever element of surprise she still had. Instead, she'd keep watch, document everything, and be ready to act if they escalated. If she had one advantage, it was that they had no idea about her capabilities. Delta Force training wasn't something she advertised, but it was definitely more potent than any ragtag group's intimidation tactics. Returning to the motel, she resumed her cleaning duties, ever watchful. Beneath her calm exterior, she was cataloging strategies, vantage points, potential blind spots, the strengths and weaknesses of the building's layout. She discreetly walked the corridor, noting where she might set up defensive positions if needed. It felt surreal, planning for a confrontation in the very place that was supposed to be her refuge. Yet she couldn't deny the mounting evidence. Trouble was here, and it was on the brink of erupting. The two men in room 9 finally emerged around noon. Martha was passing by with a cart of fresh linens when the door swung open. The men, reeking of stale beer and cigarettes, stepped into the hallway looking like they'd had a rough night. One of them made a half-hearted attempt at a grin, his face etched with arrogance. The other gave Martha a slow, suggestive once-over that made her skin crawl. She ignored it, focusing on adjusting the cart. As they stumbled past, she noticed a black patch on the inside of one man's denim jacket, something resembling the shape of a skull with the word blackout stitched above it. So her suspicions were confirmed. These two were definitely part of the gang. They didn't seem eager to hide it anymore. They headed toward the lobby where Kayla was on duty. A moment later, Martha heard their raised voices demanding a late checkout. Kayla tried politely explaining the policy, but they wouldn't take no for an answer. They cursed, calling the motel a rat hole, and demanded more time in their room without paying extra. Carl, who had been in the back office, came out to intervene. He was a mild-mannered man, not built for confrontation, but he tried his best to remain firm. In the heated exchange, Carl mentioned he'd have to charge them half a day's rate for a late checkout. One of the bikers leaned over the counter, towering over Carl. "We'll leave when we feel like it," he growled. "Got it?" Martha watched from a distance, her jaw tightening. She could sense the fear in the receptionist's posture, the tension in Carl's voice. Before she could step in, the men pushed past Carl and marched back to their room, slamming the lobby door behind them. Kayla looked shaken. Carl exhaled, wiping sweat from his brow. "I'm calling the sheriff," he muttered, though there was little hope the understaffed local department would rush to evict rowdy customers. Sure enough, when Carl reached the sheriff's office by phone, he received a half-hearted promise to swing by when we get a car free. Martha knew that could mean hours, if not days. This county was notorious for having only a couple of deputies on patrol at a time. In serious matters, the state troopers or bigger police forces might step in, but rowdy guests typically didn't qualify as a top priority. Martha decided it was time to offer Carl a gentle warning. She pulled him aside in the lobby, lowering her voice. "Carl, these guys aren't just tourists. They're part of a biker gang that's been causing trouble up and down the highway. Maybe you should encourage the other guests to leave early if they can." Carl's eyes widened, flickering with panic. "What are you talking about? You sure about this?" She gave a small nod. "They're dangerous. I've been hearing things around town. I'll help however I can, but it's best to be cautious. Let's not let this escalate." Carl rubbed his temples in exasperation. "All right, I'll see what I can do. Just be careful, Martha. If they're really that dangerous, I don't want you putting yourself in harm's way." She offered a reassuring smile, though her gut churned. "I'll be fine. Just keep a low profile." Walking back to her cleaning cart, she recalled how many times she'd given warnings in her past line of work. Civilians in war zones, local allies, even higher-ups who underestimated a threat. All too often, those warnings went unheeded until it was too late. She hoped this time would be different. In the meantime, she kept mental track of the other motel guests. The middle-aged couple had already checked out. Ronnie the trucker was on his way soon. That left only a handful of new arrivals, mostly transient travelers who didn't stay more than a night. The men from room 9 retreated behind closed doors again, presumably to nurse hangovers or plan whatever mischief they had in mind. Martha continued her housekeeping rounds, but she knew the calm was as fragile as a thin sheet of ice over deep waters. The next encounter with these bikers might not be just a heated argument, it could be something far more dangerous. And if that happened, she would have to decide how far she was willing to go to protect this place she now called home. By late afternoon, the temperature soared, and the sky took on a harsh, bright glare that intensified every color to almost surreal levels. The distant fields shimmered with heat. In the motel parking lot, a thick silence hung in the air, broken occasionally by the hum of air conditioners or the crunch of tires on gravel. Martha had just finished replacing some faulty light bulbs in the hallway when she heard it, a thunderous rumble of multiple motorcycle engines. Stepping outside, she saw them, a small convoy of bikers roaring off the highway and into the motel's driveway. She counted 6 bikes, each carrying a rider clad in worn leather jackets, with the same blackout insignia she had glimpsed earlier. Dust billowed around them as they parked in a rough line. At first glance, Martha assessed them with a practiced eye. Each man seemed physically fit, their posture radiating the kind of swagger that came with the territory of an outlaw gang. They shut off their engines in near unison, the sudden silence more unsettling than the noise had been. The two men from room 9 emerged swiftly, as if they had been expecting backup. One of them gestured to the others, pointing toward the motel. Martha watched from a vantage point behind a soda machine near the lobby entrance, trying to stay inconspicuous yet curious. She overheard one of the newcomers speak in a low voice. "So this is the place. Looks like a dump to me." Another snickered. "Easier to take over then." Carl, likely alerted by the commotion, stepped out. His expression shifted from confusion to dread when he saw the group. The lead biker, a lean man with a thick beard and a patch that read Viper, sauntered up to Carl, ignoring the scorching sun. "We're looking for rooms," he announced, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. Carl swallowed hard. We're pretty full," he stammered, glancing back at the nearly empty parking lot. Martha cringed at the obvious lie. "Might not have enough vacancy for all of you." "Make room," Viper replied, eyes dark under bushy brows. He shoved a wad of cash into Carl's hand. "That enough to change your mind?" Carl hesitated, torn between fear and the sense that turning them away might provoke something worse. "I suppose we can figure something out," he finally conceded, voice trembling. As Carl led them to the front desk, the bikers locked their attention on everything around them like predators surveying new territory. Martha retreated inside, slipping behind a corner so they wouldn't see her observing. She recognized this kind of swagger from her deployments abroad, the bold confidence of people who believed they owned any space they entered. Slinking into an adjacent hallway, she caught fragments of their conversation. They joked about business expansion and setting up shop. Words like shipments and storage drifted through the air. It didn't sound like they were planning a short stay. She heard them mention the old barn outside town, a likely reference to a remote property they might be interested in commandeering for whatever illegal activities they ran. After securing the room keys, the bikers started hauling gear off their motorcycles. Martha spotted duffel bags, presumably stuffed with more than clothes. She wondered if they contained weapons or contraband, if the Blackout Gang was indeed involved in trafficking, stolen goods, or worse, they could pose a serious threat to everyone around. Quietly, she ducked into a supply closet and used her phone to photograph a few of the license plates on the bikes. She'd pass the info to the sheriff's office if the time came. In the back of her mind, she weighed her options. If they decided to terrorize the motel or the neighboring community, she couldn't just stand by. She might be one person, but she had training that could tilt the odds. The question was whether she dared reveal her hand or try to handle this behind the scenes. Returning to her housekeeping duties, she pretended not to notice the bikers prowling the corridors, banging on vending machines when they failed to deliver a snack, laughing raucously. Carl looked like he was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Kayla, the receptionist, had gone pale. Meanwhile, the occasional guest who stepped outside quickly retreated to their rooms, alarmed by the atmosphere. Martha knew the tipping point was near. The motel was no longer just a waypoint on the highway. It was now a potential battleground. The rules of engagement she once followed as a soldier felt hazy in this civilian context. But she reminded herself that protecting innocent people had never required permission. The mission was always to safeguard, no matter the place, no matter the odds, and she was ready to do exactly that. The late afternoon sun cast long, menacing shadows across the parking lot as the Blackout bikers settled into their newly acquired rooms. Martha watched discreetly as they moved in and out, carousing in the corridors. Their demeanor suggested they felt untouchable. One of them, a barrel-chested man with tattoos winding down both arms, loudly asked Kayla about the nearest liquor store, ignoring her clear discomfort. When Kayla pointed him to the main street in town, he flashed a wolfish grin and then waved over another biker to accompany him. Carl tried to maintain an air of calm professionalism, but every time he locked eyes with Martha, she could see the anxiety simmering beneath the surface. He mouthed, "Sheriff?" with a questioning look, and she shook her head slightly. Calling the authorities again right now might only incite the gang further unless they actually committed a crime. The local sheriff's department was no match for a large, well-armed gang, and that knowledge bred a sense of creeping helplessness in everyone. While the rest of the motel staff tiptoed around, Martha methodically prepared. She noted which rooms the bikers occupied. Rooms 2, 3, 4, and 9. She tallied their potential vantage points, memorized the layout in relation to the parking lot and the highway. She took a few minutes to confirm the positioning of exit doors, the backup, generator, and possible choke points within the hallways. If chaos erupted, these details could be crucial. In the late evening, 2 more bikes arrived, reinforcements or perhaps part of the same gang that hadn't shown up earlier. Their riders carried themselves with the same brazen confidence. By now, the motel felt more like a gang clubhouse than a humble roadside stop. They laughed loudly, cussed freely, and blasted music from a portable speaker, ignoring complaints from frightened guests. As darkness fell, the tension grew palpable. The flickering neon sign at the motel entrance provided the only significant light in the lot, casting ghostly glows on the bikers' leather jackets. One of them sat outside his room, sharpening a knife on a whetstone with deliberate, dramatic motions. Another kept glancing around as if waiting for someone or something. Martha kept a close watch through the window of the staff lounge, adrenaline pulsing. She was no stranger to intimidation tactics. She recognized the bikers were establishing dominance. It was a tactic she'd seen warlords use in conflict zones. Arrive with force, instill fear, and make the locals too terrified to resist. She clenched her fists, struggling to maintain her usual calm. Not here, she thought, not if I can help it. She checked in on Kayla, finding her alone at the front desk, eyes glued to the security monitor that offered grainy footage of the parking lot. "You okay?" Martha asked softly. Kayla nodded, but her voice trembled. "I've never seen anything like this. They're like a pack of wolves. Carl wants me to lock the lobby door once it's midnight. I just hope they don't break it down." Martha gently squeezed Kayla's shoulder. "We'll be fine," she assured. "Try to stay calm, and if anything happens, call me first." Kayla glanced at Martha's uniform, just a simple housekeeping outfit, but somehow Martha's presence felt like a shield. At around 9 o'clock, the entire gang convened in the parking lot, forming a loose circle. Martha couldn't hear everything they said, but she caught mentions of pickup trucks, midnight run, and store it here. It solidified her belief they were planning some illicit deal, possibly involving weapons or drugs. The old barn outside of town might be their stash location, and the motel was to serve as a temporary base. Unable to shake the sense of looming danger, Martha decided to quietly retrieve her hidden firearm. Slipping away from the watchful eyes of the bikers, she found a moment to enter her room, secure the Beretta M9 at her waistband under a loose jacket, and return the floorboard to its place. She felt a familiar weight on her hip, the kind she hadn't carried since leaving the military. It was unsettling and oddly comforting all at once. Outside, the roar of motorcycles starting up announced the bikers' departure. A few left, a few stayed behind, but none looked as if they intended to check out anytime soon. Martha knew the true confrontation was inevitable. The question was whether it would erupt here at the motel or somewhere else in town, and would she be ready to stop it? Midnight crept in with an oppressive, claustrophobic darkness. The temperature had dipped slightly, but the air remained thick, as if the entire region held its breath. By now, Martha could see that half of the bikers had left, presumably on some mission involving whatever pickup trucks they'd referenced earlier. The ones who stayed behind lurked around the parking lot, speaking in hushed tones and casting suspicious glances at any noise they heard. Carl had locked the lobby doors and turned off most of the lights to discourage casual loitering. He and Kayla holed up inside, going over the motel's meager security measures. Meanwhile, Martha patrolled the perimeter under the guise of tidying up outdoor trash cans. She made sure to walk softly, mindful of every step that crunched the gravel. In the darkness, her senses were heightened, every small rustle or flicker of light grabbing her attention. A sliver of moon cast pale light on the battered highway nearby. Martha paused at the edge of the parking lot, scanning the horizon. In the distance, headlights glowed, followed by the rumble of engines that came closer by the minute. Soon, more bikes arrived, flanking 2 old pickup trucks that looked loaded with something heavy under tarps. The convoy parked, flooding the motel with throaty noise and harsh headlight beams. She watched from behind a low hedge as the newcomers dismounted, exchanging words with the ones who had stayed behind. From the tense looks on their faces, it seemed the job they'd set out to do hadn't gone as smoothly as they hoped. One of them kicked a tire in frustration. Another brandished a pistol at the sky, discharging a round that cracked the silence like lightning. Panic spiked in Martha's chest, but she kept her composure. A reckless show of force meant to intimidate anyone who might challenge them. Lights flicked on in a few guest rooms as startled travelers peered out from behind curtains. Soon, those lights went off just as quickly as if the guests realized their best course of action was to remain unseen. Martha felt a surge of protectiveness. In another time, on another continent, she had learned to stand up for people caught in the crossfire. Here was no different, except she was outnumbered and operating alone. Or so she thought. Because at that moment, a memory flickered. The handful of old military contacts who still owed her favors. She had severed most ties when she sought a quieter life, but a few remained in her phone under code names. If she truly needed backup, she might have a shot at calling in some help. The question was whether she could buy enough time for them to arrive, or if she even dared drag them into this messy situation. Her heart pounded as the bikers argued among themselves. The tarps on the pickup trucks shifted, revealing crates that looked suspiciously like ammunition boxes. So it was a weapons deal, or at least something close to it. If they planned to stash those arms in the old barn outside town, then the motel and the entire surrounding area would become a hub for organized crime. Fear gnawed at her, but also a steely determination. She stepped away from the scene, returning inside. Kayla was pacing near the lobby desk, her face contorted with worry. "Are they shooting guns out there?" she whispered. Martha nodded. "Stay inside, lock all doors. Don't confront them." Kayla's eyes brimmed with tears she tried to hold back. Martha placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I'll handle it," she said softly, not elaborating how. Walking down the dimly lit hallway, she felt the old currents of adrenaline coursing through her, reminiscent of the tightrope of tension she knew so well. "I can't let them terrorize this place. I won't." She reminded herself of her training: infiltration, sabotage, neutralizing threats. The memory of the weapon holstered at her side made her posture a little straighter. "I might be alone, but I'm not helpless." A plan began to take shape in her mind, one that involved stealth, cunning, and leveraging the motel's layout. She knew she had to wait for the right moment, that a premature move could backfire, but the wheels were in motion. This was no longer just about protecting a roadside motel. It was about stopping a criminal ring from gaining a foothold. As she slid into her room to finalize her thoughts, the moon's faint light illuminated her reflection in the window. Gone was the subdued motel cleaner. For the first time in years, Martha Green, Delta Force operator, stood in her place, ready for action. Martha Green barely slept after the bikers fired that single warning shot into the Alabama night. In her modest, staff-allocated room, she sat fully clothed on the edge of a squeaky bed, eyes fixed on the door. Her heart pounded in a steady rhythm, a leftover habit from too many nights spent on edge during deployments. She half expected the door to burst open at any moment, but the motel hallway remained quiet, eerily so considering the blackout gang's presence. By 4 a.m., unable to bear the anticipation any longer, she rose and moved around, checking every corner of the small space as if scanning for hidden threats. Outside her window, the last few bikers loitered in the parking lot, occasionally revving their engines for no apparent reason other than to assert dominance. She wondered if they were coming down off some adrenaline high, or perhaps waiting for daybreak to make their next move. Eventually, she found herself recalling an old Delta Force mantra: adapt, improvise, overcome. It had gotten her through countless missions that seemed hopeless at the outset. Repeating those words silently, she steeled herself with the resolve to face whatever lay ahead. If the gang decided to bring violence to the motel or the nearby town, she wasn't going to stand aside. Once the sky began to pale, she slipped her Beretta M9 into a small bag, careful to keep it concealed, then crept through the silent corridor. The carpets in this section of the motel were fraying, and they muffled her footsteps. Her goal was to do one last sweep of the property before the new day's chaos began. She paused at the door leading out to the parking lot, peering through a thin gap. Two bikers were slumped on their parked motorcycles, talking quietly. One occasionally cast a suspicious glance at the motel windows. Martha eased open a side exit instead, one that was typically used for deliveries. Stepping out into the pale dawn, she felt the summer heat already pressing down. She stuck to the shadows, circling around to the back of the building. There, behind a row of battered dumpsters, she found what she feared. More footprints, fresh cigarette butts, and a partial set of tire marks on the dirt. Someone had spent a good deal of time there overnight, possibly as a lookout. The treads looked like truck tires, maybe from the pickups that had arrived earlier. She crouched to snap another quick photo on her phone, storing the evidence in case it would be needed later. Returning inside, she navigated to the front desk where Kayla dozed fitfully with her head propped on her arms. Even in sleep, worry creased the young woman's forehead. Martha gently tapped her shoulder, and Kayla jolted awake, eyes wide. "Everything okay?" she asked, voice still groggy. Martha nodded, then whispered, "No sign of trouble yet, but keep your guard up." Kayla gave a small nod, stifling a yawn. Carl left around 2 hours ago to check on his family. He was worried sick. He said he'll be back soon. She lowered her voice further. "What if we just tell them to leave?" Martha's expression grew grim. "They won't listen, Kayla. They've staked a claim here. We'll need a different approach." Straightening up, she added, "Let me handle it. Just don't provoke them." Without further explanation, Martha strode away, leaving Kayla to stare after her in a mix of relief and apprehension. The time for passive waiting was over. The ex-Delta Force operative inside Martha demanded decisive action. Whether the local sheriff showed up or not, she intended to keep these thugs from wreaking havoc unchecked. In her mind, she sketched an initial plan. Gather more intel on the gang's exact numbers, ascertain their immediate intentions, and discreetly secure the motel's vulnerable points. The place might not be a fortress, but every building had nooks and crannies that could be used strategically. She'd done this kind of reconnaissance half a world away, often with fewer resources. Now it was time to adapt those tactics to a rundown motel in rural Alabama, her new battlefield. By late morning, the tension in the motel corridors felt thick enough to cut with a knife. The blackout bikers came and went, slamming doors and talking loudly about unfinished business somewhere outside town. Martha observed that a few of them carried sidearms openly, almost tauntingly, though they kept them holstered. A couple of them idly played cards in the hallway, flicking cigarette ash onto the worn carpet. When guests walked by, the bikers would eye them, letting out low chuckles. It was a calculated intimidation designed to keep everyone uneasy. Carl had returned just as he promised, but his expression spoke of deep concern. He cornered Martha near the supply closet after lunch. "They're planning something big, aren't they?" he asked, voice trembling. "Those crates in the trucks, they could be weapons. My wife wants me to shut down the motel, send everyone home, but I don't know how. It's my livelihood." Martha laid a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "I'm on it, Carl. Right now, just keep your distance. Make sure Kayla stays safe inside the office. If they start causing real trouble, call 911 again. I have a feeling local law enforcement might not be enough, but it's better than nothing." He looked at her like he wanted to ask more, to question how a motel cleaner could tackle a heavily armed gang. But fear, or perhaps intuition, kept him silent, and he nodded. Martha took that as permission to do whatever needed doing. Shortly after, she quietly slipped away from the motel, telling Kayla she was going to make a quick supply run. The truth was, she needed to gather intel from other parts of town. The diner, the gas station, maybe even the folks at the post office. Someone might know more about the bikers' movements or hideouts. Martha was no stranger to building an informational network. She stepped outside to her pickup truck, a battered old Ford she'd bought cheap when she first moved to Alabama. As she pulled out of the motel parking lot, she couldn't help noticing two bikers watching her from the shade of a big oak tree. One nudged the other, and they seemed to exchange words, perhaps marking her as the nosy cleaner who had no business leaving. Martha made a mental note. "They're starting to notice me, Braun." Driving into town took barely 10 minutes. The main street was a snapshot of small-town America. One-story shops, a drugstore, and a couple of cafes. She parked near the diner she'd visited before, stepping inside to find Lucy, the same waitress, dealing with a slow lunch shift. The second Lucy laid eyes on Martha, her expression sharpened with concern. What on earth is going on at that motel of yours? We keep hearing bikes rumbling in and out, and folks say there's trouble. Martha settled onto a vinyl stool at the counter, lowering her voice. The blackout gang is there, at least a dozen of them. Maybe more on the way. They're armed, looking to set up shop. I need to know if anyone's seen them meeting with local contacts or scoping out properties. Lucy's eyes widened. You'd best be careful asking around about them. She leaned in, glancing at an older gentleman hunched over a cup of coffee at the far end of the counter. Word is some local toughs have joined them, doing errands. They're talking about that old barn near the abandoned feed store. It's got easy road access and not much traffic passing by. She hesitated. But honey, you're just a motel worker. What can you do? Martha offered a small, tight-lipped smile, the kind that revealed more than words ever could. I'll manage, she replied quietly. She paid for her coffee, left a tip, and exited. Outside, the sun bore down mercilessly, matching her simmering resolve. There were puzzle pieces out there scattered across this sleepy town, and she was determined to assemble them before the gang's plan reached a boiling point. Martha's next stop was the gas station. Eddie, the anxious attendant, was behind the register, tapping his fingers nervously on the counter. His eyes flicked toward the door as she entered, relief flashing across his face when he recognized her. They're still at the motel, aren't they? He asked, glancing around as though the bikers might appear from thin air. She nodded. More of them arrived last night. Eddie, I need specifics. Anything you've overheard, names, places, teams. He swallowed hard. A couple of them came by earlier, yelling about some big score. They grabbed a bunch of junk food, and one tossed money on the counter. Almost broke our tip jar. I caught a mention of a big rendezvous tomorrow night. Something about getting everything prepped at an old barn. He shook his head, biting his lip. If they stashed guns there, this could get ugly fast. Martha thanked him, then lingered by the station's entrance. The idea of a big rendezvous set her nerves buzzing. Whatever deal or operation they planned, it would likely solidify the gang's foothold in the region. The consequences could be dire, ranging from the spread of illegal weapons to violent showdowns with local law enforcement. She knew all too well how quickly criminal enterprises escalated. Before heading back, she made one last visit to the local sheriff's office. The building was a small, nondescript structure. Inside, a lone receptionist manned the front desk with a bored expression. When Martha inquired about Sheriff Wilkins, the receptionist sighed. He's out on a call, should be back in an hour or so. Her tone suggested that was an optimistic estimate. I need to file a concern, Martha began, choosing her words carefully. She didn't want to reveal her identity or training unless absolutely necessary. There's a biker gang at the roadside Star Motel. They're heavily armed. I think they're planning something bigger. The receptionist's eyes flickered with disinterest, overshadowed by a weariness that spoke of limited manpower. We've had a few calls about them. The sheriff's aware, but we don't have the resources for a large-scale operation unless they commit an overt felony. She slid a standard form across the counter. You can write down the details here. Martha's frustration flared. In a place like this, bureaucracy and understaffing often meant trouble was free to grow unchecked. Still, she filled out the form meticulously, noting suspicious behavior, vehicles, even approximate head counts. She left her phone number but not her full name or address. Delta habits died hard, and anonymity might be a protective shield if things took a dangerous turn. Leaving the sheriff's office, she felt the weight of a community teetering on the brink. A handful of criminals could easily overpower the limited local police force. All it would take was one show of violent force, and the entire town could become a battleground. As she fired up her old Ford and headed back toward the motel, she remembered one of her final missions, securing a remote village from a ruthless militia. Her team had been outnumbered but tactically superior, leading to a swift victory. Now she stood alone, but her objective wasn't so different. Protect innocent lives from those who'd plunder them. On the road to the motel, she replayed Eddie's words, a big rendezvous tomorrow night. She had less than 24 hours to glean more intel, find any advantage, and brace for impact. While the sheriff's office trudged through its red tape, Martha intended to do what she did best, prepare for a battle on her own terms. As Martha approached the motel, she noticed a motorcycle parked apart from the others. It looked different, older, a bit more weathered, and its license plate was partially obscured by dust. It didn't match the style or pristine shine of the Blackout Gang's newer bikes. Curious, she parked her truck near the side entrance. Could this be another newcomer aligning with the bikers? Or perhaps something else entirely? Slipping inside, she found Kayla behind the counter, wearing an uneasy expression. "We've got a visitor asking about you," she whispered, nodding toward the small lounge area. Martha glanced that way and froze. Seated on a worn-out couch was a broad-shouldered man in a flannel shirt, his hair cut short, a thin scar slicing above one eyebrow. His eyes were sharp, scanning the corridor with practiced vigilance. The moment their gazes locked, Martha's breath caught in her throat. He stood, arms loose at his sides, and offered a subtle half-smile. "Collins," she said, barely above a murmur, stepping toward him. "What are you doing here?" He shrugged, his stance conveying an ease that belied the tension around them. "Heard a rumor from an old friend that trouble was brewing in this part of Alabama. Figured I'd check it out. Didn't expect to find you, though." His voice was low, but it held a note of genuine relief. Once, she and Collins had fought shoulder to shoulder in Delta Force operations overseas. They'd parted ways after her final mission, each seeking to bury ghosts in their own manner. And yet, here he was, in the last place she would have guessed. Martha quickly guided him into a side hallway for privacy. "I'm in deep here," she admitted, scanning for eavesdroppers. "There's a biker gang. They're armed, planning a big operation soon. The local law is outmatched." Collins nodded, his expression serious. "I gathered as much. Saw some of those blackout jackets around. They're not exactly subtle." He hesitated. "You need backup?" She exhaled, the burden of carrying this alone suddenly lifting, if only a bit. "Yes," she said. "I've been trying to keep them contained, but they're growing bolder by the hour. They've all but taken over the motel." He rolled his shoulders, a gesture Martha recognized from their army days, him preparing to step into a fight. "I've been in the region, doing odd security gigs. I can give you a hand, but we'll need a plan. We can't just waltz out there, guns blazing. They outnumber us 10-1. Her lips curved into a tight smile. "That's not my style anyway. We'll do this smart. Stealth, infiltration, sabotage, whatever it takes to prevent them from using this place as a base of operations." She briefly updated him on the situation. The likely weapons cache in the old barn, the possibility of a major deal going down, and the fear gripping the townspeople. Collins asked pointed questions, quickly grasping the layout and constraints. His presence felt like a lifeline. Where she had been a single operative, she now had a partner trained to handle exactly this kind of threat. They stepped back into the lobby. Kayla looked both worried and relieved to see them together, as if sensing that a silent alliance had been forged. "I'll be in my room," Martha told Collins. "We'll plan from there. Just act like an old friend dropping by for a visit. Don't let the bikers think you're a threat." Collins nodded, tipping an imaginary hat at Kayla. "Ma'am," he said politely, then followed Martha down the hallway. Neither of them noticed the two sets of eyes watching from the far side of the building. A pair of bikers leaning against the wall, exchanging dark, knowing glances as the ex-Delta operators disappeared behind a door. Safe behind the locked door of Martha's modest room, they spoke in hushed tones. Martha laid out a rough sketch of the motel's layout using a notepad and a pen. She indicated potential choke points, narrow hallways, a stairwell leading to a seldom-used storage area, and the side exit favored by the staff. Collins knelt beside her, studying the crude map with the intense focus she remembered from their covert planning sessions. "How many are in the gang right now?" he asked, "counting everyone we've seen?" "At least a dozen. Could be more, given the trucks and the possibility of new arrivals. They seem to rotate in and out. Some might be stashing gear elsewhere and returning here at night." Collins grunted. "Arms trafficking maybe, or drugs, but from the way they talk about crates, I'm guessing guns. Has the sheriff's department done anything?" Martha gave a wry laugh. "They're overwhelmed. They can't deploy real force unless the gang commits a major offense. And even then they'd be outgunned." He nodded grimly, tracing a finger along the hallway drawn on the notepad. "We need to isolate them. If they spread out, they'll outmaneuver us. But if we can corner them in specific areas, we have a chance." Martha tapped an area near the parking lot. The biggest problem is the open space outside. They have free rein to ride off if we confront them head on. We'd need to block the exits, but that might be too obvious. Collins glanced around her room. It was plain, with a battered nightstand and a single lamp casting a yellowish glow. A far cry from the specialized equipment and high-tech gear they once had. But his voice was steady. We adapt. We can set up distractions, maybe sabotage their bikes or trucks, discreetly, so they can't flee when we make our move. She thought of the times she'd rigged enemy vehicles to limit pursuit or infiltration. We'll need to do it quietly. If even one of them catches on, we're done. Checking the watch on her wrist, she noted the hours ticking by. They said the big rendezvous is tomorrow night. That means we have the rest of today and tomorrow to gather intelligence and prepare. Collins leaned back. We might need allies on the outside, someone who can call in a bigger net if we can hold them here, because once the bullets start flying, we won't stand much chance alone. Martha's mind flashed to the old phone contacts she'd considered earlier. I have a few, but they're scattered. Even if they can come, it might take a day or two. Let me see who's closest. She fished her phone from her pocket and flicked through the sparse address book. A few names jumped out. Retired military buddies. Some living states away, others overseas. She frowned. The help might not arrive in time, if they were even willing and able to show up. As she deliberated, a faint sound echoed from the hallway, a scuff of boots on the worn carpet. Martha raised a finger to her lips, motioning Collins to silence. The footsteps paused near the door. Then, after a tense few seconds, they moved on. She exhaled, quietly locking eyes with Collins. They're probably sniffing around already, she murmured. We have to be more careful. We can't let them suspect we're working together. He nodded. Then let's come up with a cover story. Let's say I'm your cousin, just passing through. That'll explain my presence. Meanwhile, we'll pretend we're harmless while we set our trap. Agreed? Martha gave a resolute nod. Agreed. Let's move before they tighten their grip. With that, they stood in unison, each feeling that old surge of battlefield readiness. The plan was sketchy, the odds formidable, but in their line of work, success rarely came any other way. They stepped into the corridor, instantly spotting one of the bikers loitering by the vending machines. His hair was braided, and he had a small, jagged scar across the bridge of his nose. He eyed Collins first, then Martha, a lazy smirk tugging at his lips. Didn't know the little cleaning lady had company, he drawled, shifting his weight so that his shoulder pressed casually against the wall. Who's your friend? Collins adopted the casual demeanor they'd agreed upon. I'm just passing through, he said, voice calm, visiting family in the area. The biker's grin widened, not hiding his suspicion. Family, huh? He looked at Martha as though expecting an explanation. She only offered a polite nod, silently cursing how transparent it might appear for Collins to show up at this exact moment. But they had no choice. I was just showing him around, she managed, gesturing vaguely down the hall. Need to check on a few rooms before we head out. The biker shrugged, pushing off the wall. He approached them slowly, scanning Collins from head to toe. We don't like strangers poking around. Hope you ain't planning to stay. We already got ourselves a crowd. Collins remained unruffled. I'll be gone soon. No worries. The biker stared a moment longer, then stepped aside in what felt like a deliberate show of delayed courtesy, letting them pass. As they walked by, he spat a wad of gum onto the carpet, a final petty act of disrespect. They continued to the lobby, where Kayla hovered behind the reception desk, ringed by half-empty coffee cups. She eyed Collins warily, obviously remembering Martha's instructions to treat him like a cousin. Welcome, she said, voice unsure. So you'll be staying with Martha? Collins forced a polite chuckle. Well, she's letting me crash a day or two. Family discount, right? Kayla nodded, but the tension in her shoulders remained. The moment the biker from the hallway disappeared around the corner, Kayla leaned forward. They've been asking about you, Martha. Wanted to know where you went earlier. I told them you were just out running errands. Martha set her jaw. Then they're definitely watching us more closely. We'll have to be careful. Kayla, can you keep an eye on who's coming in and out? Note the time, how many, anything you see, but do it discreetly. Kayla gulped, nodding. I'll try. They come by the desk every so often. just to stare me down. It's terrifying. Martha offered a gentle squeeze on Kayla's hand. We appreciate it. Remember, act like everything's normal. She glanced at Collins, who gave a subtle nod. They walked out to the parking lot next, aiming to appear as if they were about to leave for lunch or groceries. Outside, the heat pressed down on them like a heavy blanket. Two more bikers stood near a pair of motorcycles, engaged in a hushed conversation. They fell silent when Martha and Collins passed, their eyes tracking them all the way to Martha's old Ford truck. Despite the scorching sun, a chill ran down Martha's spine. The entire atmosphere crackled with latent aggression. Climbing into the truck, Collins shut the door and turned to face her. They're definitely suspicious. We need to move fast. Martha nodded, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Yeah, I think it's time we scouted that barn. Collins's gaze hardened with resolve. Let's see what we're dealing with, before night falls again. Revving the engine, Martha pulled away from the motel. In the rearview mirror, she could still see the bikers glaring after them. She and Collins were no longer just individuals passing through. They had become targets to watch. The stage was set for a high-stakes game of cat and mouse, and time was running short for them to come out on top. They found the old barn easily enough. Everyone in town seemed to know of its existence. A dilapidated structure near an abandoned feed store, accessible via a bumpy dirt road dotted with patches of wild grass. The barn itself stood at the end of a clearing, its weathered planks and rusted metal roof showing decades of neglect. A few battered silos and scattered farm machinery lay in the surrounding fields, half buried in weeds. Martha parked the truck a good distance away, shielding it behind a copse of trees. The late afternoon sun sent long shadows over the countryside, providing them with enough cover to approach undetected. They walked side by side in silence, scanning the area. Collins carried a pair of old binoculars he'd pulled from his bike's saddlebag, and Martha kept her phone camera ready. Near the barn's entrance, tire tracks crisscrossed the dirt, fresh ones by the look of it. One set appeared to match a heavy-duty pickup, perhaps the same type she'd seen at the motel. Crouching behind a tangle of brush, they surveyed the area. The barn doors were slightly ajar, revealing blackness inside. Martha spotted movement, a figure stepping out momentarily, then ducking back in as if on guard duty. Looks like they already have at least one man posted, Collins murmured, handing over the binoculars. She took them, adjusting the focus. Yes, there was definitely someone inside. Through a gap in the barn wall, she glimpsed the shape of crates. Could be ammunition boxes or something similar. A wave of tension rippled through her. It's a cache, she muttered, probably of weapons. That's what they've been planning to hide here. Collins nodded grimly. If they manage to establish a foothold in this barn, they'll distribute those arms throughout the region. The local cops don't stand a chance. Martha lowered the binoculars. We need a way to stop them before they finalize whatever deal is happening tomorrow night. Either sabotage or an ambush, preferably without turning this into a bloodbath. Innocent people could get caught in the crossfire if the gang panics. Collins's features hardened. Remember that time we seized that militia weapons cache in the desert? We didn't have enough firepower, so we rigged their vehicles to disable them. Then we forced them into a bottleneck, took them down one group at a time. She nodded, recalling the night mission vividly. It had been one of their toughest operations, but also one of their most successful. We can adapt a similar tactic here, she said. If we sabotage their trucks at the motel and cut off their escape routes, we could lure them to the barn or confront them in smaller groups. But we'll need precise timing. Collins's gaze flickered with determined energy. Tonight, we can quietly disable a few of their vehicles. Make it look like mechanical failures. Tomorrow morning, they'll scramble to fix them, giving us a window to set traps near the barn. Once they realize they can't leave easily, they might try to store the weapons here anyway. That's when we strike. Martha considered the risks. We'll have to act under the radar. If they catch us tampering with their bikes or trucks, we'll be knee-deep in a firefight without backup. Collins's jaw set. Better we risk that than let a criminal enterprise dig in. At least we know what we're doing. He pointed toward the barn again. The guard had stepped outside, lighting a cigarette, oblivious to the two ex-soldiers watching from the tree line. We should fall back before they spot us. They retreated carefully, mindful of every twig underfoot. The sun dipped lower, splashing the sky with orange and pink hues. Back at the truck, Martha felt an odd mixture of dread and clarity. Their plan was dangerous, but it might be the only way to prevent a far worse outcome. As she started the engine, she asked Collins, "You still think we can pull this off with just the two of us?" He offered a crooked grin. "We've done more with less." Despite the gravity of the situation, she felt a surge of warmth, an echo of their old bond forged in adversity. They had a plan, however risky, and if there was any pair that could execute it under these conditions, it was them. They returned to the motel under the cloak of twilight, the last shards of daylight fading behind distant hills. The place looked as foreboding as ever. Several motorcycles were now lined up near the entrance, their chrome catching the faint glow of the flickering neon sign. Even from a distance, Martha could spot the silhouettes of bikers milling around, exchanging cigarettes and conversation. A tension hovered over the parking lot, reminiscent of a coiled spring ready to snap. Parking discreetly, Martha and Collins exited the truck. They split up, Collins heading to his own bike, which he'd left parked earlier, and Martha making her way to the lobby. On the way in, she crossed paths with Viper, the gang's apparent leader, whose beard and etched scowl made him instantly recognizable. He regarded her with cold detachment. "Hey, cleaning lady," he said, voice low and gravelly. "Got a lot of friends visiting these days?" She paused, fighting to keep her composure calm. "It's a motel, sir. People come and go." The polite response might diffuse suspicion, or at least not fan the flames further. He took a step closer, the smell of gasoline and sweat radiating off him. "Your cousin, is that right? The big guy?" Martha merely nodded. "He's passing through. Should be gone soon." Viper let out a short, harsh laugh. "Hope so. We don't need any more house guests messing around here." Then he turned sharply, walking away toward the rows of bikes where a cluster of gang members waited. Martha clenched her hands, exhaling slowly once he was out of earshot. Inside, Kayla was at the reception desk, her eyes flicking nervously between the small CCTV monitor and the door. She visibly relaxed upon seeing Martha. "They've been asking about both of you. Kept trying to find out when you'd be back," she murmured, voice tense. Martha offered a brief smile. "Don't worry, just keep your head down." She glanced around the lobby, empty aside from the two of them. "If things get dicey tonight, you find a safe spot. Maybe lock yourself in the office with Carl." Kayla looked as if she wanted to protest, but ultimately nodded. I will. But what about you?" Martha patted her shoulder reassuringly. "I'll be fine." She didn't add the details, that she and Collins planned to sabotage the bikers' vehicles under cover of darkness. Kayla was better off not knowing, fewer chances for something to slip out under pressure. Heading down the corridor, Martha found Collins leaning casually against a vending machine, arms crossed. He flicked his gaze toward her, then nodded at a security camera overhead, keeping his words to a minimum to avoid being recorded. "Let's meet by the maintenance shed out back in an hour," he said softly, turning his head as if studying the stale snack selection behind the glass. Martha nodded subtly, continuing on as if she had no further business with him. In her room, she closed the door, pulled out her phone, and began scanning her contacts again. She sent a short, coded message to one old comrade who might be within a few hours' drive. "Need eyes, potential code black. Old coordinates, R star." She didn't expect a swift response, but it was worth a try. Time dragged as she waited for darkness to deepen. She busied herself by rechecking the small kit of supplies she'd squirreled away. A multi-tool, extra magazines for the Beretta, zip ties, and a flashlight fitted with a red lens for minimal visibility. The plan to incapacitate bikes and trucks required precision and stealth, two skills Delta Force had drilled into her relentlessly. Now, in this rundown motel, that training would face a bizarre test. She couldn't help but feel a flicker of irony. Once she'd operated under the auspices of the U.S. government in war-torn regions. Now she was on home soil, dealing with criminals who acted like warlords. At precisely 11 p.m., she slipped out through the side exit. The moon provided meager light, but it was enough to illuminate the forms of several motorcycles lined up. She spotted Collins near the edge of the lot, dressed in dark clothes that blended into the shadows. Their eyes met, and in that silent exchange, they confirmed what they had to do next. The motel was quieter now, the day's tension seeming to hold its breath. A few bikers still lingered near the front entrance, presumably keeping watch. The rest had retreated to their rooms, no doubt preparing for tomorrow's big operation. Little did they know that by the time the sun rose, their vehicles might be out of commission. And if things went according to plan, those precious crates in the barn would be far more difficult to move or to protect. Two figures glided through the night, silhouettes scarcely discernible against the motel's dimly lit parking area. Martha and Collins moved with the methodical caution that years of special operations training had instilled in them. Their breathing was controlled, their footsteps careful to avoid the crunch of gravel or any stray debris. They started with the pickup trucks, parked a short distance from the row of motorcycles. Under the faint glow of a distant street lamp, Martha crouched beside the first truck, rummaging quietly in her multi-tool kit. Her objective, to disable the engine in a way that would not be immediately obvious. She found the main fuse box under the hood. Snapping out a critical fuse could buy them time. She also removed the spark plug wires from the ignition coil, memorizing their original configuration so she could replace them if he needed to. The sabotage was subtle, likely to be mistaken for an electrical fault. Meanwhile, Collins tackled the second truck. He worked swiftly but gently, cutting a small hole in the radiator hose and applying a quick sealant that would deteriorate under heat. It would cause the engine to overheat within miles of driving, stranding the vehicle at the worst possible time for the gang. His hands moved with practiced sureness, a testament to countless missions where vehicle sabotage was crucial for infiltration. Once done, they reconvened behind the trucks, exchanging a quiet nod. The more significant challenge lay ahead: the motorcycles. While trucks could be disabled under the hood, bikes were more straightforward, but also riskier to sabotage if discovered mid-act. It didn't help that a couple of bikers still lounged near the entrance, occasionally glancing around as if restless or suspicious. Martha and Collins timed their approach for when the men's conversation grew engrossing. Slipping around to the opposite side of the motel parking lot, they started with a bike whose owner appeared to have gone inside for the night. Collins knelt beside the rear wheel, letting out a slow breath as he carefully loosened the brake fluid line. A small but steady leak would degrade brake performance over time. Martha, on the other side, quietly deflated the front tire, just enough that it wouldn't be noticeable until the rider got moving at higher speeds. They worked down the line of bikes, repeating variations of the same sabotage with precise efficiency. Sometimes they tampered with the clutch cable or removed vital fuses under the seat. Other times they introduced a subtle leak in the fuel line. The key was randomness. No single sabotage repeated too often, reducing the risk of the gang instantly spotting the pattern. Each disabled component would cause a different malfunction. Sweat beaded on Martha's forehead. Even though the air had cooled somewhat, the tension made her pulse hammer. She glanced repeatedly at the gang members near the entrance, expecting at any moment to see them approach. But luck seemed to favor them tonight. The men remained oblivious, lost in their own conversation, maybe bragging about tomorrow's big haul or complaining about the small-town vibe. It took nearly an hour to sabotage 6 motorcycles and 2 trucks. When Martha and Collins finally crept back toward the motel's rear exit, they exchanged a look of cautious triumph. The job was done, and so far, no one was the wiser. Once safely inside, they parted ways. He slipped toward his rented room, a courtesy Carl had granted after some persuading, and she tiptoed to her own quarters. Inside, Martha exhaled a shaky breath. She leaned against the closed door, heart still pounding. The sabotage was a success, but it was only one piece of the puzzle. The real confrontation would come soon, when the blackout gang discovered their vehicles inoperable, or at best, compromised. If everything went according to plan, the gang would be stuck here or forced to rely on a small number of functioning rides. That might funnel them into a single location, preferably the barn, where the final confrontation could occur without risking innocent bystanders. She locked her door and checked her phone, half expecting a message from the old contacts she'd tried to reach. Nothing. It seemed she and Collins were truly on their own, at least for now. Glancing at the clock, she realized dawn wasn't far off. She doubted she'd sleep, but she needed rest to stay sharp. Tomorrow promised to be a day of reckoning, and if either side miscalculated, the motel could turn into a battleground. The first hint of sunrise shimmered on the horizon, casting a dull orange glow across the motel parking lot. Martha had managed only a couple of hours of restless sleep, but she rose at the usual time, 5 a.m., to maintain appearances. Dressed in her housekeeping uniform, she forced her weary body into motion, stepping outside for her customary walk around the perimeter. She purposely kept her pace slow and casual, as if this were any other morning. The scene that greeted her was a tableau of dawning chaos. A handful of bikers were already up, fiddling with their motorcycles in confusion. One crouched next to a bike with a half-deflated tire, swearing under his breath. Another banged his fist against the handlebars, cursing a piece of junk that refused to start. Off to the side, two men examined the trucks, one cursing the engine that wouldn't turn over, while the other scratched his head under the open hood. Viper stood in the middle of it all, arms crossed, face twisted in anger. He barked orders, telling them to figure out what was wrong, to fix it immediately. At times he glared at the motel buildings, as though suspecting that sabotage might be at play, but he had no evidence yet. His men, desperate to appease him, scrambled for tools, rummaging through the truck cabs and cursing the bad luck. Martha moved past them with studied nonchalance, offering a polite "mornin'" to no one in particular. Some barely noticed her. Others spared her a suspicious glance. She briefly caught Collins's eye as he slipped out of his own room. He gave a subtle nod, an unspoken confirmation that their night's work was paying off. She circled around to the lobby, where Kayla looked more jittery than usual, her shaky hands wrapped around a steaming coffee cup. Carl was nowhere to be seen. "They're upset," Kayla whispered. "A bunch of them came in, demanding to know if we had any mechanic on staff. I told them we don't." Martha nodded. "Just keep calm. They'll probably try to fix the vehicles themselves. If they can't, they might call in outside help. Either way, it'll slow them down." Kayla bit her lip, glancing nervously at the CCTV monitor. Viper was pacing like a caged animal. "Martha, what if they figure out we did something?" Her eyes narrowed. "They'll suspect, but they won't have proof. And they can't exactly call the cops and complain. If they do suspect us, we'll handle it." Despite her reassuring words, Martha felt a knot tighten in her stomach. The sabotage had been a bold move, a ticking time bomb of suspicion. If the gang connected the dots too soon, they might lash out violently. But if it kept them tangled long enough for her and Collins to coordinate an ambush at the barn, it would be worth the risk. Outside, the gang's frustration intensified. Accusations flew among them. "You messed with the bikes." "No, you did." "Shut up and get the toolkit." Their voices rose in anger, overshadowing the hum of early morning traffic on the nearby highway. To Martha, it sounded like the discordant overture to a violent opera. With every passing hour, the blackout crew's patience would erode, inching them closer to a breaking point. She felt a presence at her side and turned to see Collins, who'd quietly entered the lobby. He lowered his voice. "Looks like they'll be grounded for a while. Let's use this window. We head to the barn, set up an ambush, or at least secure the area. We can't let them stash those weapons. If we can corner them there, we might force a surrender or at least hold them until help arrives." Her eyes flicked to Kayla, who watched them with worried curiosity. Martha nodded. "Okay, we'll make our move soon. Keep your phone on you. We might need every advantage we can get." They walked out together, projecting the demeanor of two people simply heading off for a day's routine. But beneath that facade, adrenaline churned. The stage was set for a high-stakes confrontation. Whether it would end in surrender, negotiation, or gunfire was anyone's guess. All Martha knew for sure was that she wouldn't back down. If these bikers thought the roadside Star Motel was easy pickings, they were about to learn how wrong they were. The morning sun was still low on the horizon when Martha Green and her old Delta Force ally, Collins, discreetly left the roadside Star Motel. The air felt charged with anticipation. The bikers' vehicles had been sabotaged overnight, leaving most of them furious and stuck in the parking lot. Already, voices rose in heated arguments near the trucks. One man threw tools to the ground in frustration, while another checked his phone, presumably calling any mechanic he knew. Viper, the gang's leader, stood apart, surveying the chaos with a venomous glare. Martha and Collins avoided direct confrontation, giving the impression they were merely heading out for errands. They navigated their vehicles onto the highway, soon turning onto a back road that would lead them closer to the old barn the bikers had earmarked for their illicit operation. As the asphalt gave way to dirt, Martha felt a twist of anxiety. The sabotage was a temporary solution. If the bikers managed to fix even a few bikes or trucks, they could still transport their weapons. Worse, the outlaws might shift from frustration to outright violence once suspicion fully took root. In her mind, Martha replayed the morning's tension. As she passed the lobby earlier, Kayla had confided that a couple of the bikers had confronted her during the night. They questioned her about who'd been sneaking around the parking lot. Thankfully, Kayla insisted she had no idea. But the episode rattled her. Carl, too, had shared with Martha the fear that once the gang's tempers hit a tipping point, the motel staff would bear the brunt of it. Now, driving along a rural lane with Collins following on his motorcycle, Martha tried to formulate a plan. She'd gleaned from eavesdropping that the gang's big meeting might happen around sundown or shortly thereafter. That left them just enough time to prepare the barn as a choke point. But if the bikers decided to move earlier, even on half-fixed vehicles, her plan could unravel. Over the phone, Collins had recommended they aim to herd the blackout crew into the barn itself. With the trucks in poor condition, the bikers' best bet for stashing or guarding weapons was that old structure. If Martha and Collins could set up discreet traps, spike strips, sabotage the barn doors, or even rig a few basic tripwires, they might contain the outlaws long enough to call in law enforcement. But given the local sheriff's limited resources, Martha knew they'd be mostly on their own until any reinforcements, if they even arrived, could bolster them. A few miles out from the barn, the dirt road wound through a patch of forest. Martha pulled her truck onto the shoulder, stepping out to greet Collins, who'd stopped his bike behind her. The canopy of trees offered some cover, and the morning light filtered through green leaves in dancing patterns. "Any calls from your old contacts?" Collins asked in a hushed tone as he removed his helmet. Martha shook her head. "Nothing yet. Either they can't make it or they're too far away." He exhaled, gaze flicking toward the treetops. "Then it's just us. We'll handle it." His voice carried more confidence than she felt, but it was a comfort. They agreed to leave Collins's motorcycle hidden in the underbrush and proceed in Martha's truck. Riding double would attract less attention if any bikers scouted the area. As they drove, the tension in Martha's gut coiled tighter. She reminded herself that she was no stranger to dangerous odds. Delta Force had trained her for precisely this kind of high-risk scenario. Even so, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered about all that could go wrong. Pushing aside her doubts, she focused on the mission. Protect the motel, protect innocent lives, and deny the gang their foothold. The truck rolled up near the barn's perimeter, concealed by a thicket of tall grass. Martha and Collins stepped out, carefully scanning the surroundings. Morning sunlight spilled over the shabby structure, illuminating the peeling boards and broken windows. It looked deserted, but they knew better than to trust appearances. If a guard from the previous night was still around, he could be hiding within the barn's dark recesses. They approached on foot, weapons holstered but at the ready. From a distance, they heard nothing. No idle conversation or footsteps. A quick sweep around the barn's exterior revealed fresh tire tracks, likely from the night before, but no sign of a current occupant. Perhaps the lookout had gone back to the motel to assist with the broken vehicles. Inside, the barn was cluttered with old farming equipment, rusty plows, rotted wooden crates, and stacks of moldy hay bales. Sunlight streamed through numerous gaps in the walls, creating a patchwork of brightness and shadow. Toward the rear, they found what they were looking for, a few crates stamped with cryptic markings that resembled ammunition codes. One crate lay partially open, revealing packaging for small arms. Nothing conclusive, no obvious rifles or major hardware, but enough to confirm the gang's dealings went beyond typical biker mischief. Martha felt a jolt of anger. The idea of these criminals stockpiling weapons in her adopted community struck a nerve. She had served her country to protect people from such dangers. Now, that threat was at her doorstep. Glancing at Collins, she saw a similar fire in his eyes. They wasted no time. Working swiftly, they began positioning rudimentary traps. Collins hammered a series of large nails through short wooden planks, creating crude spike strips. They placed them in strategic spots near the barn entrance, hidden under loose hay. Anyone trying to drive a truck inside would suffer punctured tires. Martha found some lengths of rope and rigged them into tripwires around the interior, attaching them to old metal scraps that would clatter loudly if triggered. It wasn't lethal, but it could buy them crucial seconds if the bikers stormed in. The biggest risk lay in how quickly the outlaws might swarm the barn. If the sabotage at the motel delayed them only briefly, they could arrive en masse. Martha checked her watch. Nearly 9 a.m. If the gang stuck to their plan for a twilight rendezvous, she and Collins had most of the day to reinforce the barn. However, the element of surprise would be lost if even one scout dropped by earlier. After an hour of laboring in tense silence, they paused to assess. The barn's interior now had multiple hidden alarms, forcing anyone who entered to move cautiously. Next, they needed vantage points. A small loft overlooked the main floor, perfect for an overwatch position, except the ladder leading up looked shaky. Martha tested the rungs, wincing when one creaked ominously. She and Collins agreed they'd reinforce it with leftover planks and keep it as a fallback spot. From there, they could cover most angles with firearms if a shootout erupted. By mid-morning, they had done as much as they could with the limited resources on hand. Both felt the urgency mounting. "We should head back to the motel," Collins suggested. "Ensure no one's followed us here." Martha nodded, wiping sweat from her brow. Even though it wasn't yet noon, the Alabama sun had grown fierce. "Agreed," she said. "Let's see if the gang managed to fix their vehicles. If they did, we might need a new strategy." Quietly, they retraced their steps, exiting the barn and returning to Martha's truck. The surrounding countryside remained eerily still, as if bracing for the storm to come. A flutter of unease coursed through Martha. She glanced at the barn one last time before driving off. In a few hours, the place could become ground zero for a violent showdown, and she had no illusions about the cost if things went wrong. The ride back to the motel was uneventful, but the moment they rolled into the parking lot, Martha's stomach tightened. At least 4 motorcycles were rumbling to life, their engines roaring angrily. A handful of bikers, presumably the ones whose machines had suffered less extensive sabotage, were preparing to ride out. She recognized the burly man from room 9 with his distinct braided beard. Another wore a bandana emblazoned with a skull. Viper was conspicuously absent, but that did little to ease her worries. Carl and Kayla stood off to the side, pretending to wipe down a car window, though it was obvious they were watching the bikers with dread. When Martha parked her truck, she and Collins stepped out as casually as possible. One biker gave them a long, hard stare but said nothing. "What's happening?" Martha asked quietly, keeping her voice low enough that only Carl and Kayla could hear. Carl grimaced. "Some of them managed to fix their bikes, or at least patch them up. Looks like they're heading out." One was shouting something about a change of plans. Kayla's voice trembled. "They've been fighting all morning, accusing each other of messing up the bikes. They suspect sabotage, but I don't think they know who did it." Martha exchanged a look with Collins. If the bikers were leaving early, they might head straight for the barn, hours before the planned nighttime rendezvous. That meant their carefully laid traps wouldn't benefit from the cover of darkness. On the other hand, if only a handful of gang members left now, that might reduce the numbers they'd have to face later. A sudden outburst drew their attention. A tall, lean biker with a patch that read "Spade" swung his fist at another member, cursing about fools who can't fix an engine. The scuffle ended quickly when Spade shoved the other man against a parked truck. He then glowered at the rest, warning no one to interfere. Martha felt the tension escalating by the second. The battered trucks likely still wouldn't start, so the men who remained behind were stuck. But these 4 or 5 who had their bikes operational would be free to move, potentially securing the weapons in the barn. Or worse, they could lash out at the motel staff if they believed the motel had a hand in their misfortune. "We need to keep tabs on them," Collins muttered. "They may split their forces, some going to the barn, others staying here." Martha nodded. "Let's see if we can slip out and follow at a distance. We'll learn where they're headed." She turned to Carl. "Stay inside. If things get ugly, lock the doors, call the sheriff, and keep Kayla safe." Carl gave a nervous nod. "Will do. Be careful." Within moments, the bikers kicked their engines into gear and roared out of the lot. Gravel and dust swirled in their wake. Martha and Collins rushed to her truck, trying not to draw attention from the handful of gang members still hanging around the lobby. She started the engine, and they pulled onto the highway a safe distance behind the bikers, maintaining a gap that hopefully wouldn't raise suspicion. The chase set Martha's nerves aflame, a reminder of past missions where tailing insurgents required equal parts precision and nerve. In the distance, the cluster of riders sped down the highway, weaving through sparse traffic. At one point, they signaled a turn, heading down a smaller road that cut through farmland, exactly the route to the barn. Collins clenched his jaw. "They're definitely going there," he murmured. "We'll have to engage sooner than expected. Are you ready?" Martha steeled herself, checking the rearview mirror. No other vehicles trailed them. It was just farmland, the open road, and a rendezvous with deadly stakes. "Ready as I'll ever be, Ashina. I'll ever be," she said, pressing down on the gas. No more waiting in the shadows. The confrontation was about to escalate, and the two ex-Delta operatives would have to use every ounce of training to avert bloodshed, or survive it. The winding farm road led to the barn's vicinity. Martha spotted the bikers' taillights up ahead, shining like beacons of impending danger. They slowed, then turned onto the overgrown path leading to the derelict structure. Martha eased off the gas, not wanting to be seen or heard. A line of bushes and a small copse of trees offered partial concealment, so she parked behind them. She and Collins quickly stepped out, keeping low. From their vantage point, they watched the bikers arrive at the barn and kill their engines. One dismounted and stormed inside immediately, while another hung back to guard the entrance. Voices rose, echoing off the barn walls. Though muffled by distance, Martha could tell they were agitated, perhaps discovering the makeshift traps she and Collins had set. "Should we move in?" Collins whispered, eyeing the single lookout by the door. Martha hesitated. If they charged in guns drawn, they might spark a full-blown shootout. The better tactic might be to wait for confusion to take hold. Maybe their traps would buy time for a more strategic approach. Before she could answer, a sudden shout erupted from inside, followed by a metallic crash. One of the tripwires had likely done its job. Martha suppressed a grim smile. The lookout spun around, cursing under his breath. He rushed into the barn, leaving the motorcycles unguarded. In that brief window, Martha and Collins crept forward, using tall grass for cover. Within moments, they reached the side of the barn, pressing their backs against the aged wooden planks. Shouts echoed from inside, laced with anger and confusion. A second crash resounded, this time deeper, like a heavy object falling. Martha braced for the possibility that a trap might have injured someone. She hadn't intended lethal harm, but these bikers were hardly delicate. Peering through a gap in the wall, she saw a chaotic scene. Two gang members trying to lift a hay bale that had toppled from the loft, while another rubbed his shin, likely struck by the tripwire's scrap metal alarm. The crates of arms stood partially open in the background. A cloud of dust and hay motes swirled under the barn's rafters, adding to the confusion. Their vantage point also revealed that the spike strips they'd hidden near the entrance had ruined at least one bike tire. Someone had foolishly driven inside, discovering the sabotage too late. The rider cursed loudly, yelling at his companions about an inside job. Collins met Martha's eyes, nodding toward the direction of the crate. That was their objective: prevent the gang from loading or removing the weapons. The question was how. Outside, the remaining motorcycles sat in a cluster, engines still warm. Martha and Collins shared a quick, silent conversation of glances. Should they sabotage these bikes as well, or focus on disarming the gang inside? Another shout arose from within. A name was called, "Spade, get the tools," followed by an angry retort. At least 4 bikers were rummaging around, from what Martha could see. Collins gestured that he would circle around back. Martha nodded, gripping her Beretta M9 concealed beneath her shirt. This next move would decide the confrontation's tone. If the bikers were still determined to move the weapons, they'd eventually recover from the traps and brute force their way. Martha slid carefully to a side entrance, a smaller door once used for livestock. Her heart thudded. Any misstep could trigger gunfire. She took one final breath, recalling the Delta Force mantra: adapt, improvise, overcome. Then, with meticulous stealth, she pushed the door open just enough to slip inside, the gloom swallowing her as the barn's interior raged with confusion. The moment Martha slipped into the barn, The thick scent of dust and old hay clung to her nose. She crouched behind a toppled crate, keeping her breathing steady. Nearby, two bikers hovered around the main entrance, grumbling about the trap that had punctured a bike tire. Further in, another pair cursed at the tripwire that had scattered tools and debris across the floor. Collins had gone around to the rear of the barn. If all went according to plan, he'd find a way to corner them from that angle. For now, Martha kept low, scanning for the crates of weapons. She spotted them stacked in a shadowy corner, partially concealed by a large tarp. One crate was open, showcasing small arms and ammo, though it was too dark to see precisely what type. She heard footsteps crunching on loose straw. One of the bikers, the tall man named Spade, stormed past, muttering, "This is messed up, man. Viper's gonna kill somebody if we don't figure this out." He carried a crowbar, presumably to break open or reposition crates. Martha's pulse quickened. If they managed to move those weapons, it would be a matter of minutes before the entire haul could be transferred to functional bikes or stashed in a more secure location. A metallic clang erupted toward the barn's rear entrance. She guessed it was Collins making his move, perhaps distracting or corralling them. Instantly, two bikers whirled, guns drawn. A shot rang out, the report echoing through the space. Martha flinched at the sharp crack, adrenaline surging. Her mind raced. Collins must be under fire. I need to act. From her hidden spot, she rose just enough to line up her pistol sights on the nearest biker. He was stepping around, searching for the source of the noise. She aimed for the ground near his feet and pulled the trigger. One precise shot. The bullet struck the dirt in a puff of dust. His head snapped in her direction, eyes wide, but it forced him to dive for cover behind a broken tractor. That gave Collins a second to reposition. Another round whizzed overhead, splintering a wooden plank near Martha's shoulder. She ducked, heart pounding. The firefight had begun. So much for a quiet ambush. She inhaled, remembering her advanced training. Steady stance, breathe, pick your shot. Rising again, she caught a glimpse of the second shooter, a bearded biker behind an upturned wheelbarrow. She squeezed off 2 rounds, hitting the wheelbarrow and forcing him to duck. Shouts filled the barn, laced with fear and aggression. One biker yelled, "We're under attack," while another screamed for backup. Outside, more voices grew alarmed, and Martha braced for additional reinforcements. She signaled in the general direction where she believed Collins to be, tapping the side of her weapon 3 times, an old code they used for advance cautiously. Spade kicked aside a broken crate, trying to find a line of sight on Martha's position. She saw the glint of his sidearm as he raised it. Her training took over. She pivoted, aimed, and fired. The shot grazed his forearm, causing him to howl in pain and drop the crowbar. He scrambled behind a wooden beam, cursing in a ragged voice. Martha's ears rang from the gunshots, her eyes watering from dust kicked up by frantic movement. This was a far cry from the quiet life she'd chosen after leaving Delta Force. Focus, she chided herself. She needed to neutralize the threat while ensuring the safety of Collins, and if possible, avoid a body count that would haunt her. A sudden movement to her left. The bearded biker lunged from cover, aiming low. She stepped back, arms tense, but before he could squeeze the trigger, a burst of noise erupted from behind him. Collins appeared, tackling the man hard. They tumbled to the ground in a chaotic mix of limbs and curses. At that moment, Martha noticed a new threat. The barn's large entrance flickered with fresh silhouettes. More bikers had arrived, likely alerted by the gunfire. Her chest tightened. They were pinned in a lethal crossfire unless they found a better position. Despite the fear roiling within her, Martha's determination blazed. She might be outnumbered, but she had the advantage of training, cunning, and a will to protect. Wiping sweat from her brow, she steadied her aim once more. The final stand was fast approaching. Sunlight spilled through the barn entrance as 3 more bikers charged inside, guns drawn. A barrage of bullets pelted the walls and the floor, sending chips of wood and dust spiraling into the air. Martha dove behind the carcass of an old tractor, pressing herself against its rusted metal frame. Every muscle in her body tensed, prepared for the next shot. The barn had become a maelstrom of echoing gunfire and hostile shouts. Collins wrestled with the bearded biker, delivering a swift knee to the man's abdomen. The biker grunted, momentarily stunned. Collins seized the opportunity to disarm him, flinging the pistol aside. He then pinned the man's arm, forcing a quick submission. But there was no time to secure him. A fresh volley of bullets ripped through the barn, forcing Collins to seek cover behind a bale of hay. Martha risked a quick glance toward the entrance. She counted at least 5 bikers now, plus the wounded or pinned ones inside. That made roughly 7 or 8, enough to overwhelm them if the outlaws coordinated. But the gang seemed equally confused, shouting contradictory orders and accusing each other of failing to watch the perimeter. Suddenly, a new thunder of engines rumbled in the distance, capturing everyone's attention. Multiple vehicles approached at high speed, but it was impossible to see who they belonged to from inside the barn. The bikers closest to the door exchanged wary looks. Were these more blackout reinforcements? Or the law finally responding? Moments later, the engines cut out. Martha heard car doors slam, followed by muffled shouts. She dared a peek and glimpsed dark uniforms approaching. Some local deputies, and behind them, several unmarked SUVs. The cavalry? Her heart pounded with cautious hope. She remembered placing a vague call at the sheriff's office days ago, but she hadn't expected a full-scale response. Then she recalled the coded text she'd sent to an old comrade. Could these be federal agents or a specialized task force? One of the bikers near the door cursed, snapping her attention back. He fired a wild shot at the newly arrived vehicles, but the bullet went wide. Immediately, authoritative voices yelled, "Drop your weapons! Hands up!" That triggered a rapid shift in the barn's chaotic energy. Some bikers froze, uncertain whether to fight or surrender. Others scurried deeper into the barn, trying to hide behind crates or searching for an escape route. Collins took advantage of the confusion to bolt across an open section of the floor, sliding beside Martha's position. "Cops?" he breathed, chest heaving. She shook her head. "Not sure. Could be more than just cops. Did you see those SUVs?" He nodded. "Yeah, they look official." Gunfire erupted again, this time from outside, where the new arrivals appeared to be exchanging shots with at least one biker who refused to stand down. Over the din, Martha heard a commanding voice echo, "ATF, stand down! This area is surrounded!" Her eyes widened. The ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, had arrived in force. That meant someone had alerted a higher level of federal law enforcement. A surge of relief mixed with apprehension coursed through her. If the ATF was here, the bikers would be outmatched. But she and Collins were also inside the barn, armed, and not exactly wearing name tags announcing friendly. If they weren't careful, they could be mistaken for suspects in the crossfire. In the midst of this swirling mayhem, Spade reemerged, clutching his wounded arm. He spotted Martha and Collins crouched together, his face twisted with rage. "You two did this," he hissed, raising his pistol with his uninjured hand. Martha reacted instantly, diving forward. She fired a single round, aiming low to disable. The bullet struck Spade's leg, and he collapsed, screaming profanities. His gun clattered to the floor. Meanwhile, more spotlights from outside suddenly lit up the barn's interior, intensifying the confusion. Silhouettes of armed officers fanned out, guns aimed, shouting for everyone to drop their weapons and come out with hands raised. A hush fell as some of the bikers, seeing no escape, complied in fear. Others still clung to their weapons, eyes wild with desperation. Martha felt Collins's grip on her shoulder. "We need to identify ourselves now," he whispered, "before they decide we're just another part of this gang." She nodded, adrenaline spiking anew. They had seconds to act. Crawling out from behind the tractor, Martha raised one arm while keeping her pistol pointed safely downward. Her voice rang out, shaky but firm. "Don't shoot! We're not with them!" Flashlight beams fixed on her. Harsh commands barked, "Hands where we can see them! Drop the weapon!" She complied, setting her Beretta on the dirt floor. Collins mirrored her actions. Their hearts hammered as they prayed that clarity would prevail before a stray bullet found its mark. Through the case, a tall figure in tactical gear stepped forward, scanning the scene. "Which one of you is green?" he demanded over the swirl of light and dust. Martha's eyes widened, so the message got through. Relief fluttered in her chest, tempered by the high stakes all around. "It's me," she called out, trying to steady her voice. "Sergeant Martha Green, retired. This man's with me. We're the ones who called you." The agent lowered his weapon slightly. "Stay put," he ordered. We'll sort this out. Behind him, the barn's interior glowed with more flashlights as the ATF team moved in to secure the bikers, who either lay wounded or cowered in submission. At last, the violent standoff teetered toward its final act. And though Martha didn't lower her guard entirely, Delta Force habits died hard. She allowed herself the faintest flicker of relief. Help had arrived, and it might just be enough to end the Blackout Gang's reign of terror. Within minutes, the barn was swarming with law enforcement officers from multiple agencies. Some wore tactical ATF gear, others donned the badges of local sheriff's deputies. A swirl of flashing lights from vehicles outside illuminated the dusty interior, painting the chaotic scene in pulses of red and blue. Martha and Collins stood side by side, hands raised, while agents carefully disarmed the remaining bikers and checked the downed ones for injuries. A stern-faced ATF agent approached with two subordinates. He was tall, with a neatly clipped mustache and the confident bearing of someone used to leading high-stakes operations. His gaze flicked from Martha to Collins, then to the bikers. "So," he said in a voice that carried authority, "somebody here knows how to set tripwires." Martha exhaled slowly, lowering her hands now that an officer had already retrieved her pistol. "I do," she answered evenly. "We rigged the barn to slow them down. Minimal lethal risk, just enough to confuse them." The agent grunted. "Could have fooled us. Our team nearly tripped over the same wire." He nodded at a subordinate who stepped forward with zip ties for Martha and Collins. "Policy. We'll have to secure everyone for now until we can confirm who's who." Collins lifted his arms, allowing the agent to pat him down. "We're not criminals," he insisted calmly. "We're the ones who tipped off the authorities. The Blackout Gang was stockpiling weapons here." From the far side, a deputy chimed in. "We found crates of firearms. Looks like some serious hardware. These scumbags were definitely up to no good." The ATF agent studied Martha's face more closely. "You said your name's Green? One of my colleagues mentioned you've got a military background." She offered a small nod. "Delta Force retired. I've been working at the roadside Star Motel. These bikers showed up, threatened the locals, and started using this barn to store illegal weapons." She glanced at Collins. "He's also former special operations. We couldn't sit by and watch them terrorize the town." One of the tactical officers eyed the wounded bikers. "You two took all these guys on by yourselves?" Collins shrugged. "Mostly we just slowed them down till you arrived." The mustached agent waved over another official. "Check their IDs, confirm they're not on any wanted list. If they're clean, we'll get statements. Good work on the tip." Then to Martha and Collins, "We appreciate the assistance, but next time let us handle the takedown. This was risky, could have gone sideways in a heartbeat." Martha flashed a weary, wry smile. "Trust me, we didn't exactly plan on a firefight. Circumstances escalated. We just wanted to protect innocent people." He nodded, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "We'll want a full debrief. Let's get you out of here before the rest of this place collapses. It's a hazard zone now." Amid the commotion, paramedics arrived to tend to the injured. The sight of Spade and a few other bikers being carried out, bleeding or bound, evoked conflicting emotions in Martha. On one hand, she despised their violent behavior. On the other, she couldn't forget the cost of confrontation. Lives were at stake, on both sides. As officers guided her outside, the harsh sunlight made her squint. Vehicles packed the clearing, sheriff's cruisers, ATF vans, and even a battered pickup that looked suspiciously like Carl's. The motel owner stood by the truck, wearing an expression of deep relief. When his eyes met Martha's, he visibly relaxed, as if her safe exit confirmed that justice had indeed arrived. Behind them, Collins emerged, escorted by a deputy. He gave Martha a subtle thumbs up. Their plan had worked, albeit through more chaos than intended, and now the Blackout Gang was dismantled. For the first time in days, the clenched knot in Martha's chest began to ease. The cost had been high, but it appeared that they had averted a far bigger tragedy. The scene outside the barn resembled a makeshift command post. ATF agents conferred over open trunks filled with tactical gear. Deputies led battered bikers to patrol cars, the criminals' hands zip-tied behind their backs. Some of the outlaws still cursed and spat, others sagged in resigned defeat. Above it all, the blazing Alabama sun bore witness to the end of the Blackout Gang's operation in this corner of the state. After an initial round of questioning, Martha and Collins were released into the custody of the local sheriff to await formal statements at the Roadside Star Motel. Carl had arrived to help clarify the situation, vouching for their intentions. The sheriff's radio crackled constantly with updates, more weapons found at the barn, a possible link to a bigger cartel, and the need for further investigation. But the immediate threat was neutralized. By late afternoon, the ATF sweep wrapped up. The trucks used by the gang were impounded, and the wounded were transferred to a nearby hospital under guard. A handful of other bikers who had stayed behind at the motel were also apprehended once word spread of the raid's success. Some tried to flee on foot, but there were too many deputies, too many eyes watching. When Martha, Collins, and Carl finally returned to the motel, they found Kayla pacing anxiously in the lobby. She ran up to Martha the moment she walked in. "Thank goodness you're all right." Kayla's voice trembled with relief. "They said there was a shootout?" Martha gave her a quick hug. "We're fine, and the gang's done. They won't be bothering this place anymore." Kayla exhaled shakily. I thought I'd have to shut everything down, or that the bikers would burn it to the ground. But you stopped them." Her eyes shone with gratitude. Carl patted Martha on the back, albeit gently, as though still wary of her surprising capabilities. "You saved us. I mean, I had no clue you were, you know, trained to handle something like this." Martha forced a small smile. "I tried to leave that life behind. Didn't expect it to follow me here." Collins, standing by the reception desk, cleared his throat. "If not for your sabotage and traps, they'd have been armed to the teeth. The ATF might have arrived too late." Carl nodded vigorously. "I'm just glad we can move on. The motel might need repairs, but at least we're safe." Behind them, a local deputy entered, tipping his hat in a polite gesture. "We'll be taking statements now," he said, looking mostly at Martha. "We need to get a clear account of what happened. Don't worry, though, the feds seem to understand y'all did this town a favor." Over the next hour, Martha recounted the events, how the bikers arrived, intimidated guests, and tried to store weapons at the old barn. She downplayed the extent of her own lethal skill set, framing their actions as desperate but necessary. Collins provided corroborating details, focusing on the times and places they noticed the gang's suspicious activities. By dusk, the official interviews wound down. A deputy handed Martha a business card. "If we need more info, we'll call, but for now, you're free to go. And, thanks again." Standing in the motel parking lot, the summer sky fading into streaks of purple and orange, Martha looked around at a place that finally felt peaceful. She remembered her first days here, just another housekeeper in a sleepy Alabama stopover. Now the staff looked at her like a hero or perhaps a curiosity, a mix of both, she supposed. Collins placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did good, Green," he said softly. "Maybe now you can actually have that quiet life you wanted." She offered a half smile. "Maybe, but if trouble ever finds me again, I'll remember I can't run from who I am." He nodded, understanding all too well. The lull of crickets filled the warm night air. Though the motel wasn't bustling with guests, the absence of roaring bikes and hostile glares was enough of a victory for one day. That evening, the motel grounds felt like a different world. Calm, safe, almost too quiet. A gentle breeze rustled the unlit neon sign at the entrance. As if by tacit agreement, the staff congregated in the lobby after locking up all but one of the doors. Carl had bought a celebratory pizza for everyone, though few felt like eating much. Adrenaline crashes left them more drained than hungry. Kayla, gingerly sipping coffee, gazed darting to Martha. "So," she ventured hesitantly, "you really were Delta Force?" Martha glanced at Collins, who raised his eyebrows as if to say, "Your call." She set her mug down. "Yes," she admitted, choosing her words carefully. "I served overseas for years. Some missions were highly classified. After my last operation, I needed a break. Wanted a normal life. Ended up here." Carl listened intently, arms folded across his chest. "I knew there was something different about you," he said, a note of admiration coloring his tone. "The way you handled tough guests, like you weren't afraid of anything." She mustered a small laugh. "Oh, trust me, I'm afraid of plenty. I just know how to manage it." Kayla's eyes lit with curiosity. "Is that why you were so sure the bikers were trouble?" Martha nodded. It's trained into me to sense certain patterns, movements, behaviors. The way they carried themselves said they weren't just random troublemakers. They were organized, armed. Carl exhaled. Well, you saved my business. Saved us all from who knows what. We owe you, big time. Martha's cheeks warmed at the praise. She wasn't used to public acknowledgement. Her Delta missions rarely allowed such recognition. You don't owe me anything, she insisted. I did what I had to. In the corner, Collins cleared his throat. I'm heading out tomorrow morning, he said, directing the statement at Martha. Got a gig lined up a few counties over. Some rancher wants extra security, but if you ever need backup again. She gave him a grateful smile. Thanks, Collins. Same goes for you. They exchanged a handshake that carried more than camaraderie, an understanding forged in trials few people could fathom. Then, as if sensing the solemnity of the moment, Kayla piped up. So does that mean we can all breathe easy now? No more gang trouble? Martha shrugged lightly. The blackout group that was here is done for. The ATF will handle the bigger network if there is one. I think the worst of it is over for this town, at least for a while. Carl drained the last of his coffee. I'll take that as good news. Maybe I can finally fix up those broken light fixtures outside. A ghost of a smile crossed his lips. For a while, they just sat there, letting the tension ebb away. The neon sign out front flickered once, then went dark. Symbolic in a way. The motel had survived a near takeover by criminals, thanks to one unassuming cleaner with extraordinary skills, plus a timely ally and an unexpected law enforcement intervention. Eventually, the group dispersed to their rooms. Martha stepped out into the warm Alabama night, gazing at the stars that blanketed the sky. She remembered many nights in distant war zones, where the same stars shone overhead but felt unimaginably far away. Here, in this small corner of the country, she felt a subtle peace settle over her. Yes, she still had ghosts, but now she also had a renewed sense of purpose, even if that purpose was simply to protect the quiet life she'd chosen. She closed her eyes, inhaling the scent of fields and asphalt. For the first time since the bikers rolled in, she believed tomorrow might be ordinary. And for Martha Green, ordinary was the blessing she had yearned for all along. Dawn broke over the roadside Star Motel with a gentle pink sky and a crispness to the air that felt almost celebratory. The morning following the raid was peaceful. No roaring engines, no angry shouts. Guests checked out or in without incident, merely remarking on the small presence of law enforcement vehicles still lingering as they wrapped up paperwork. Martha woke at her usual hour, 5 a.m., and took her brisk walk around the parking lot. She paused at a few spots where the bikers had once gathered, remembering their leering faces and the tension that had weighed on everyone. Now only empty asphalt remained, along with faint scuff marks from tires long gone. Near the lobby, she noticed a figure packing up a motorcycle. It was Collins, donning his helmet, ready to depart for his next job. He gave her a two-finger salute. Stay safe, Green, he said over the rumble of the engine. If the quiet life gets too dull, come find me. She smirked. If I ever want more trouble, you'll be the first to know. They exchanged a brief grin, and with that, he revved the bike and eased onto the highway. She watched until he vanished from sight, the early light reflecting off his taillights like a final farewell. Carl and Kayla soon arrived, sipping coffee and chatting about normal motel business. A faulty air conditioner in room 8, a scheduling mix-up for an incoming guest. There was no talk of biker gangs or shootouts, a testament to how quickly life can return to routine once danger has passed. Outside, a lone ATF sedan remained for a short time, an agent finishing up final interviews with a local deputy. Martha politely answered a few more questions, clarifying how the traps had been set. The agent gave a nod of approval and told her they had enough evidence to prosecute the blackout members taken into custody. Once satisfied, he offered a cordial handshake. Thanks again for the assist, he said. Not the usual way we like to run an operation, but it got the job done. After he left, Martha found herself alone near the parking lot's edge, gazing at the quiet road. She leaned against the motel's signpost, letting her thoughts drift. The events of the past days felt surreal, like a flashback to another life. She had wanted calm, and calm had been invaded. Yet, in defending her new home, She had rediscovered parts of herself she thought were buried. "Excuse me, ma'am." A soft voice startled her. It was an older gentleman wearing a worn baseball cap, carrying a suitcase. "I heard this place had a bit of excitement, but seems mighty peaceful now. Think I could rent a room for the night?" Martha smiled, the gesture coming more easily than it had in a while. "Sure thing. Just see the front desk inside. They'll get you settled." He nodded and trudged off. As she watched him go, she reflected on how everyday life continued, despite the storms that occasionally ripped through. The motel would keep operating, travelers would keep passing through, and the land would bask under the unwavering Alabama sun. Stepping inside, she snagged a rag to wipe down the lobby counter, back in her role as the unobtrusive motel cleaner, at least to the untrained eye. Kayla nodded hello, preoccupied with the reservation system, and Carl was on the phone discussing new locks for the outer doors. No one who looked at Martha's gentle smile or the simple uniform would guess she had just helped stop a criminal gang, drawing on training from one of the military's elite special operations units. And she was fine with that. Let them think she was a nobody, a quiet caretaker of dusty rooms. She had proven to herself and to the unsuspecting criminals that even an unassuming motel cleaner could be far more than she appeared. A stray beam of sunlight shone through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. Martha paused, soaking in the ordinary moment. Yes, trouble might come again someday, some new threat or shadow from her past. But she had no regrets. She'd stand ready if needed, all while cherishing the small-town peace she had fought so hard to protect. And so, at the Roadside Star Motel in Alabama, life returned to normal, or as normal as it could ever be, with a former Delta Force legend quietly sweeping the floors, ever watchful, ever prepared for the unexpected. Looking back on this entire saga, I can't help but feel inspired by Martha's unwavering courage. She went from quietly doing her daily routine to risking everything to protect an entire community. The tense confrontations showed us that even in the darkest times, ordinary people armed with hope, loyalty, and hidden talents can stand against overwhelming odds. Her story reminds us that you never really know the strength someone carries inside. As the dust settles, peace returns to the Alabama motel, and life slowly falls back into a comforting rhythm. Yet we'll never forget Martha's bravery or how she reminded us that good can triumph when determined souls refuse to bow to fear. What did you think of her journey? Share your thoughts in the comments, and let's keep the conversation going. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more thrilling stories to come.